Hi, this is Jack Butler, and this is a video about where I think Michael Moore, the filmmaker, has it wrong, or where we could expand upon his perspectives. I've seen several Michael Moore movies. I really like them. I think he's a great guy. I like what he brings to the conversation. I like the questions that he forces us to look at. And this is mostly a response to his most recent movie, the one about where to invade next, where Michael Moore takes a tour of different countries in the world, but principally Europe, and looks to see if there's anything that America could learn from the culture or the way that they do things in those countries. And rightfully, he points out that there's a lot that America can learn, that social democratic Europe does some things really well, when it comes to healthcare, education, sort of like the underlying social contract, rehabilitation in the context of prisons, health and organic food in the context of what they serve in their public institutions. I remember a couple of years ago, Denmark made a pledge that something like 90% of all food within 5 years in its elderly people's homes and schools would be organic. Europe leads the world in many ways on these sorts of things. But I want to put some of his comments in perspective, because I feel like, and I know that this makes good media, but sometimes he's too tough on America, or he's not willing to look at the ways that America actually does things really well. So the first thing I want to point out is that America is unique in the global system right now because it's the dominant actor, right? It's the most powerful military. It is the most powerful economy, although China's kind of catching up fast. And so the role that a dominant actor plays in a system is unique, and it's different than the roles played by the other actors. So America, and we could debate whether this is a good thing or not, but let's just be clear, America provides security for the Western world. So America provides security guarantees for Europe through NATO and through coalitions of the willing. And so even if you, like me, imagine that the US federal budget is supersized, too big, we have to acknowledge that the US is providing a global security function, and American taxpayers pay for that. Now, you might say, well, why is the US doing that? You might be non-interventionist. You should say, well, we should roll back and be isolationist, and we should just look after our own borders. Why are we doing all this forward deployment in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria? Why do we have military installations in 150 countries in the world? And it's because in the current system, America provides security in a globalized world. And in a globalized world, forward deployment is considered important because problems can originate anywhere in the world. It's not like we can just protect borders from some kind of naval attack. It's like in the world of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, in a world where we know that there are Soviet nuclear missiles that are not fully accounted for. It makes total sense that America would have some kind of forward deployment. So I'm all saying that is to say that you can't compare Italy and the US when it comes to their militaries. Who's relying upon Italy for their security? Maybe there are some historic relationships with Italy's former colonial interests in Africa. Yes, Italy's an important part of the EU and NATO, and I'm sure they deploy in ways that are important, but they're just vastly different roles that they're playing. And when you're the dominant actor in the system, you tend to be unpopular because you are the biggest, and you tend to have a bully kind of mentality, right? And so sometimes America has a bully mentality. It has a hypermasculinity. It has a right is might, and it has a confidence that if it needs to project military power, it can do that. Even the Brits, which we have one of the biggest militaries in the world. There's a lot of deployment that the British Army needs American equipment to do. So every military in the Western world is pretty much dependent upon the American military. Now, we could be in another conversation and say, well, in an ideal world, would that be different? Would we have another structure? Would we have a cooperative structure so that global security is paid for by global citizens or citizens of the Western world, and where the balance of power and responsibility is distributed more equitably? That's a conversation I think you and I can be in. We just need to acknowledge that's not the world that we're in right now, and absent some kind of enforceable law from a supranational entity that people can believe, and they can believe in its military guarantees, we're probably not going to be in that world for a while. You take something like the European Union, which is the most successful supranational institution we've ever had, in my view, and there's still little coordinated political will for a European military. And This is after 25 years of the European Union. This is after 50 or 60 years of various European Economic Community, European Community institutions. So, European integration has been happening for about 70 years now, and there's still very little political will for that. So I think we're a little way away. If you're a citizen of a European country and you're saying, yeah, I think I should contribute more to the global pot for global security, and as part of that deal, I would like to see fewer American military installations, and I would like to see a better balance of power across militaries and within the context of a global reduction of military spending, I'm all for that. We just need to be realistic about how those guarantees can really be guaranteed. So my main thing for Michael Moore is, like, when you're making your comparisons, compare like for like. And in the instance of the US, you can't really compare like for like. So at least foreground that when you're looking like, you're looking at a country like Norway, you're talking about 10 million people. This is very different, 10 million people, and wasn't invaded fully, right, in World War II. Very different history, very different sense of how they look after themselves. Right? They're not trying to necessarily perform the same role in the world. So it's just not like for like. And hey, Norway's been involved in some really important peace accords, and I'm not saying Norway's not doing its bit. They do. They just do it in a different way. And we need to acknowledge that different actors in the system are fulfilling different functions. And if you want that function to be fulfilled differently, you need to have a credible plan that can be guaranteed for how you can do that. The second thing is, I feel like there's a little, what in the integral world we would call pre-trans fallacy. That's a kind of fancy phrase, and it basically means comparing things that are post-rational and pre-rational. So these are different stages of development, comparing things that are post-modern and pre-modern and kind of confusing them. So one of the things that Moore does in the movie is he spends time in France and Italy, and he looks at the lifestyle, he looks at the relationship with work. And he basically says these guys have it right. They have a much healthier attitude to holiday. France famously has the 35 heures, the 35-hour working week. In Italy, they were talking about how sometimes they'll get paid for 13th month, right? So at Christmas, they'll get double pay to pay for Christmas. And I'm all for, companies taking really good care of people. I just think that some of the things that Moore is venerating in that video, they haven't yet fully encountered all the structures of modernity. It's like in some ways America, not all of it, but it is more rooted in modernity. Certainly when it comes to the business world. And I'm not here to sort of defend American business practices. I think giving people only 2 weeks holiday a year is not a good idea. When I had my company in London, people, including the statutory holidays, would get 38 days of holiday a year, so they could go and spend a month in another part of the world. One of my colleagues used to spend a month in Bolivia. That's great. I'm all for that. But basically what I'm saying is don't, or be wary if you're looking at people who aren't sort of working so hard, because this is the same thing. I spent the month of March in Bali, right? And so people look at people in the Balinese culture and they're like, these guys have it right. They're chilled, they've got a very sort of healthy attitude to work and being and resting. And in some ways that's true. And also it might be that this is just a kind of earlier stage of development in some ways, where people aren't so fully engaged in the self-authoring activities of modernity. So America has probably higher rates of entrepreneurship, higher rates of self-employment than the sorts of places that Moore was looking at in Italy. And we need to be able to see the benefits of that. We need to be able to distinguish people who are working hard, who are working less hard because they're still in a very socialized mind, right? So they grew up with that way of thinking, and they may be doing a job in their local village, or they're doing a job that their family would have done. And there's a sort of joy in their work, but really their work isn't the creative endeavor of their life. Their significance in their life is coming from their structures outside of work and having enough time to pursue those things. Hobbies, family, holidays. But that's different than someone who's maybe working a really long working week, but is doing something that is more intrinsically about who they are, and they're more passionate about, and they're more engaged in. And I want to say that, in my experience of living in postmodern America, right? So I spent a lot of time in Boulder in the Bay Area, which I think largely are kind of postmodern cultures. Those are people working hard, but they're working hard at things that they really care about and that they're doing in their own way, in their own structure. So there's a kind of freedom and authenticity and self-authoring that comes with that is different than the person who gets a 2-hour lunch break working in a car manufacturing plant in Italy. That may be their passion. I'm not precluding that possibility, but I'm talking in orienting generalizations. So again, there's a thing about comparing like for like. And if you really want to look at a culture where perhaps there's more of a relationship with beingness and taking time out and being healthy and being in nature, but also like pursuing work that really matters to you and having your expression and voice in the world, I would say to Michael Moore, come look at somewhere like Boulder and not necessarily go to southern Italy. Because I think here there's more of an intrinsic balance in the culture of beingness and doingness. People will take the afternoon and go hike up Sanitas, but they work pretty hard in their own ways, and they're working on things that they really care about and that they find their expression in. And it's not like a company is telling them, oh, you get to have a 2-hour lunch break. It's like they're responsible enough that they could hike all afternoon and evening, and maybe they're going to go in and work on a Saturday morning. It's like they're managing their lives, they're managing their working experiences. That to me is a higher order integration of living than the examples that Moore is pointing to, which doesn't make them wrong, which is super cool what they're doing. It's just for most of us who are in a bit more of a authoring existence, his examples won't help us as much as the examples that are already prevalent, and not just in American culture, but I'm saying there's some really good examples of them in American culture that I think he could draw attention to. And the third thing is, when you talk about Americans not getting enough vacation, I would agree. I don't actually think it's healthy. If we were only looking through the lens of productivity, I still don't think it's effective, right? Like I think people are more productive when they have more rest or when they get to work in different environments. So most people are at risk of some kind of overwork or burnout. But let's also be clear, like work ethic's a good thing. And a lot of people work really hard in this country. And even if that's not always in the most sustainable way, there's a lot of invention and innovation and awesome businesses that get created in America on the back of a really stellar work ethic. So I want to put that in perspective. I'm sure Michael Moore works really hard. I'm sure you look at him, he doesn't look like he's taking very good care of himself. So let's look at the light and the dark. Having a work ethic, having a dream, having that kind of Rocky style motivation to make something happen, to be something, to create something that hasn't existed, and the sort of energy that needs, it's really encouraged and prevalent in this culture, which is one of the reasons why America is such an attractive ecosystem for entrepreneurs. Why there's so many immigrant entrepreneurs that want to make it in America, because there's still a culture that supports that kind of creative breakthrough and the sort of destructive but creative potential that Schumpeter talked about that capitalism brings. So let's put that in some perspective. So global security, when you're the dominant actor in the system, it's going to look different. Let's not over-venerate pre-modern cultures, and let's look at examples of integrated being and doing and work-life integration in postmodern cultures, including that exist in the US in a place like here, Boulder. And let's champion work ethic, whilst we also hold it in a more healthy framework. So there are my thoughts on where Michael Moore could expand his perspectives. I'll say again, I love his movies. I'm glad that he makes them. This is Jack Butler. If you like this video, please like it, and please come back, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on a video soon. Thanks.